Okay, in this video, we want to talk about leadership. More specifically, we want to look at values-based leadership. We would be looking at the various forms of traditional leadership, but we would be looking at it against the backdrop of values-based leadership. And here's a question. Is values-based leadership essential for leaders to be truly successful and effective? By the time we're finished with the slides that we have here, we want to be able to come to terms with that question, to have an answer to that question. Is values-based leadership essential for leaders to be truly successful and effective? So let's talk about values-based leadership. Before we get into it, we would just be touching mainly on a brief definition, and we'll be touching on some of the traits of values-based leadership, but I want to point you in this direction. If you're interested, well, of course, all over the internet you could get information on values-based leadership, but I would direct you to this study because I spent some time reading this study in preparing these slides here. So if you're interested in getting more information on values-based leadership, this is a good study that you could probably tackle. So our main objective in this session is to be able to differentiate amongst the various leadership styles as a means of increasing appreciation for the usefulness of values-based leadership. So we're going to talk about the various traditional leadership styles, and we're going to talk about those that lend themselves to values-based leadership, and we would also talk about where they may be deficient and where values-based leadership could add value. What is leadership? The ability to influence people towards attainment of organizational goals. That's as simple as we can get. How do we influence persons within organizations towards the goals of the organization? And before we talk about the types of leaders or types of leadership, it's important for us to understand various sources of power. There's legitimate power, and legitimate power comes from a person's role or position within an organization. A person or persons would conform to what is directed to the fact that they are given instructions from that individual because they recognize and accept the legitimacy of that person's power within the organizational chart. That's legitimate power. We have reward power, the ability to grant a reward such as an increase in pay, a perk, or an attractive job assignment. That's a form of power that exists within an organization once that person has the authority to grant that kind of reward. We have coercive power, the ability to take something away or punish someone for non-compliance. It often works through fear, and it forces people to do something that ordinarily they would not choose to do. So I have the ability to take away some of your vacation days. I have the ability to impose a fine. I have the ability to impose a transfer that you do not want. So that's coercive power. I have the power to punish you to the extent that you do not comply with what I'm asking of you. Expert power, and that's from knowledge and skill. You have the knowledge, skills, the abilities, and all the other attributes that will allow you to exert that kind of influence on outcomes of a situation, on decision making within a situation. That's expert power. And then we have information power, which is quite similar to expert power, but it differs in terms of its source. So in terms of expert power, we talk about the knowledge, skills, and the abilities that you may possess, which you can bring to bear on a situation or in terms of decision-making processes. Information power is distinguished by access to specific information. So a person has a lot of information, has sensitive information, has information that not very many people have. For example, a secretary who might have been in the organization for quite a while, or because of your social network, you might have access to certain kind of information, or because of your level of function within a hierarchy, you may have access to privileged information. That's information power. And then we have referent power. Stems from the personal characteristics of the person, such as the degree to which we like, respect, or want to be like them, or if we admire them. A form of reverence gained by a leader who has strong interpersonal and human relation skills. When we talk about the various types of leadership or various approaches to leadership, an understanding of power would be, of the various sources of power, would be useful. Types of leaders. We have the autocratic leader, a leader who tends to centralize authority and rely on legitimate, reward, and coercive power to manage subordinates. So an autocratic leader, person who's in control, and I'm in control because I have the legitimate power, which we talked about, the reward power that we talked about, and the coercive power to manage subordinates. You have to respect me because of my position within the structure, because I have the ability to give you a reward, or because I have the ability to punish you as well. That's an autocratic leader. A democratic leader, a leader who delegates authority to others, encourages participation, and relies on expert and referent power to manage subordinates. So we understand expert power. You have information at your disposal. You have the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you can bring to bear on certain kinds of situations. You know certain things about the persons with whom you have the opportunity to lead, and you could delegate accordingly. You're also respected and admired, and people like you, and you like your subordinates, and that is useful in managing your subordinates. So we have the autocratic leader relies on their authority within the structure, their legitimate power, the ability to reward or the ability to punish. And then we have the democratic leader, who is more so leading on their expertise as well as the degree to which their human relations and interpersonal skills allow them to be effective in managing their subordinates. So some research suggests that with an autocratic leader, they tend to get more compliance in their presence. So when the leader is present, you get a greater amount of compliance and productivity than that of the case of a democratic leader, which is not, the research showed that it was not far off in terms of getting the productivity and the compliance. But what was shown is that the democratic leader outperformed the autocratic group even in the absence of the leader. So direct control is required in terms of an autocratic leader to get maximum performance out of their followers or subordinates. Whereas direct control is not so much necessary with democratic leadership, because a person may have what is called stakes in conformity. I have a decent relationship with my leader, so even in their absence, I am going to do my work. Those sorts of dynamics operate in an underlying way such that the democratic leaders outperform, the group with the democratic leader outperform the autocratic leader. Is that laissez-faire is an impoverished management leadership style where there's a low concern for what's going on. The leader is hardly ever involved, but that is not necessarily true, or that's not necessarily accurate in terms of a way to perceive the laissez-faire leader. Laissez-faire is a French term which translates directly into leave alone or allow to do. And the principle is that the less the leader is involved, the better the group would function, consistent with situational leadership. Now, let me explain that. Laissez-faire leader is not a person who would just leave things alone and that's it. That's the way the connotation. But in actuality, the laissez-faire leader could be effective if they have a decent understanding of situational leadership. So let's talk briefly about situational leadership. So there are 4 styles in the situational theory of leadership. There's the telling style, the selling style, the participating style, and the delegating style. And these styles, they what they say to a leader is dependent on the situation with which you are faced. In terms of your followers, you must make the best quality decision in terms of how you're going to direct and motivate and guide them to the outcomes that you're after. So the styles now are dependent on readiness levels of subordinates. And readiness levels is a function of a person's education, skills, experience, and self-confidence, as well as their attitudes. So if a person is well educated in terms of what you want them to do, they're skillful, they have the skills, they have the experience, and they are confident of the outcomes they can produce, and they are what we talked about, theory Y type individuals who don't have to be coerced and directly controlled, or they're not just motivated in an extrinsic way. If their attitudes are in the right place, then you can say that that's a person who is ready. So the situational theory of leadership talks about the various stages of readiness. If you have low readiness, then you need a telling style. I'm going to tell you what to do. I'm going to tell you when to do it. I'm going to tell you how to do it. A telling style, because you have low readiness. Your education level is low in relation to what has to be done. Your skill level is low. Your attitude may not necessarily be the best. You're not that confident in what you're going to do, so I'm going to use a telling style. What to do, when to do it, how to do it. If your readiness is moderate, you could use a selling style, giving direction, seeking input, clarifying, rather than simply instructing, because your education levels, your skill, your confidence in your ability, your attitude, it's moderate. So I can use a selling style. High readiness, I can use a participating style, just to guide the effort, to support your development or support subordinates' development such that they get better, or to act as a resource from the perspective I might be an expert and I have the information, or I might be in a position to get the resources that are necessary. So I can use a participating style where we're working together to achieve the objectives. We're achieving the objectives that we set out to achieve, as well as the development of persons such that are better able to achieve objectives. And then you have very high readiness, where you can use a delegating style. So you provide a general goal and sufficient authority for persons to do the task, and then you can benefit from having a laissez-faire approach, because your subordinates or your followers, they have very high readiness in terms of their knowledge, skills, abilities, and other attributes. And their attitude, they are willing. So a laissez-faire approach can work there. And this was just to make the point that laissez-faire does not simply mean leave them alone and let them do what they want. Now we have transactional leadership. A leader who provides structure and clarifies subordinates' roles and task requirements, and depends mainly on extrinsic motivation to manage and guide employees to success. And reinforcement theory is useful to understand or to consider against the backdrop of behavior modification. And what does that mean? So the leader would provide the structure and clarify the role, the task that is required of followers or of subordinates. And behavior modification means we're going to positively reinforce desirable behavior, whether it's with just praise, whether it's something extrinsic, whether it's intrinsic. You're going to provide that kind of positive reinforcement. Whereas if it's something undesirable, you're going to use sanctions to create a form of negative reinforcement. Management by exception means that you're going to actively be looking for persons who may not necessarily be performing the way you would expect them to perform. And a passive approach means that if these persons are drawn to your attention, you're not going to be actively looking for persons who underperform, but if they are drawn to your attention, that's the only way you're going to be treating with them. And is a form, transactional leadership is a form of, based on what's going on here with these particular followers, in against the backdrop of what they're required to do, I am going to reward them to ensure that a particular behavior continues, or I'm going to use punishment to make a particular undesirable behavior become extinct. And that's transactional leadership. And then we have the charismatic leader. Begins with a lofty vision of an imagined future that employees identify with. This is important because we're going to talk about this some more when we're talking about values-based leadership. Developing a set of ideals which become value consensus for the organization or group. And when we say value consensus means that we now accept these ideals as this is the organization's way of doing things. This is now our new way of doing things. We can do it, we've done it, we see value in doing it that way, and this now become our value system. This is the organization's way of doing things. And that's the charismatic leader. Begin with a lofty vision of an imagined future. Develop a set of ideals which become the value system of the organization. Trusting subordinates and earning their complete trust in return. That's important for a charismatic leader. Skilled in the art of emotional appeal. So you're not operating from the perspective of compliance, where I instruct and you do as I say, but you're appealing to a person's emotions, how they feel about something, such that they get a better appreciation for what you set out to do. And the charismatic leader is skilled in the art of emotional appeal. Speaking to the heart of employees, letting them be a part of something bigger than themselves. This is the big picture. This is what we're about. Seeing beyond their current realities and believing in a brighter future. That's a charismatic leader. This is the approach of a charismatic leader. And when we talk about a values-based leader, you would see the charismatic approach is extremely essential or central to the success of a values-based leader. Then we have the transformational leader, a leader who uses a compelling future to inspire positive change. And there are different characteristics, including inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, idealized influence, and individualized consideration. And when we begin to talk about the values-based leader in a bit, we would talk more about these four characteristics or these four elements of the transformational leader. And then we have servant leadership, and essentially servant leadership is just a recognition that we are here to serve. My job as the leader is not to control persons or to punish persons, but to be of service to others. And those others include various classes of stakeholders, which include my end users, my customers, my clients, etc. It includes my employees, and I owe that kind of responsibility to them, such that they are able to develop, such that they are better at what they do, such that they can serve our customers and clients better. So essentially, servant leadership is a recognition that customers are at the top of our pyramid. As the leader, you provide the framework such that an execution culture could be created. Management would manage the task and the efforts of the employees consistent with that execution culture that you create that framework for. And then, of course, the employees would carry out their functions, but we are all serving our end users, our clients, our customers, etc. And that is in stark contrast to traditional leadership, where the leader sees themselves as a person who is in a particular position, has a particular rank, and could have that level of control over management and over employees, and of course over clients and users and customers. The attitude of a servant leader versus the attitude of a traditional leader sees leadership as an opportunity to serve others. That's servant leadership. And you would see values-based leadership is not that far off. Consideration for all classes of stakeholders, which we just talked about. There are various classes of stakeholders in relation to any organization. If you talk about a business, you have the clients, the customers, you have the shareholders, you have the employees, you have managers, you have suppliers, persons in the supply chain, you have the environment as a whole being having a stake in the operations of the organization. So a servant leader has consideration for all classes of stakeholders, shares power and control to drive engagement. So it's not that I'm in control and you're going to do what I say. Shares power and control to drive engagement. You have a flatter structure rather than a taller hierarchical type structure. Measures success through growth and development of others. How are we serving our end users? How are we serving our employees? How are we serving our managers? How are we serving the environment as a whole? Most importantly, the attitude of a servant leader understands it's not about them. So it's not about me and my power and my ego and what I say goes. It's not about me. It's about me caring enough to just let go of all this power, to just harness this power towards the realization of the objectives that serve all our stakeholders equally. That's the attitude of a servant leader. And when you juxtapose that with the attitude of a traditional leader, I am in a position, I'm in the top position, I'm the president of this organization, I'm in charge, I'm in top management, I'm the CEO, I'm the chairman. So they see leadership as a rank. They use power to control others and in their effort to drive engagement. Legitimate power, coercive power, reward power to drive engagement. There's an imbalance in consideration for stakeholders. So who are our preferred stakeholders, such that we give priority to those individuals rather than all our stakeholders matter. Measures success through organizational metrics such as profit and loss, such as savings, such as advancement in technology, such as outclassing the competition, such as market share. And these metrics are important, but they are achieved through, in terms of servant leadership, they are achieved through a desire to serve, to be of service to others, and a desire to develop our subordinates or our employees along the appropriate lines such that the service to our end users are of high priority to these individuals. And of course, the traditional leader believe it's about them, it's about me getting to the top and me remaining to the top and people recognizing that I'm at the top, and it's about the ego as opposed to removing barriers that could create an execution culture that makes it easy for us to serve those persons we have the opportunity to serve. Now we're going to talk about the values-based leader. And in terms of time, we are going okay. We have about maybe 15 more slides and we are on 23 minutes. We say we'll be finished with this video in about 45 minutes, so we are on time. What's the genesis of the values-based leader? What's the genesis of values-based leadership? The emergence of the 21st century was plagued with extensive, evasive, and disheartening leadership failures. Moral and ethical deficiencies were prevalent in many charismatic, dynamic, and seemingly transformational leaders that had risen into prominence in both public and private sectors. Remember, in the beginning, I directed you to research that was done on values-based leadership. What I'm talking about here, a lot of it would have come from my reading of that particular study that I directed you to. So there was this recognition that persons might have been transformational leaders, they might have been charismatic leaders, they might have been dynamic leaders in different spheres of activity in both public and private sector. But yet still it was disheartening to discover what was going on with some of these leaders, which resulted in extensive failures. Major corporations, some examples, we had Enron, and if you know the story of Enron with the chairman Kenneth Lay and how they distorted their reporting to the regulators such that they caused their accounting to appear as if they were doing well. And well, the bottom line is, I think persons ended up getting several lifetimes in prison, right? So you have a lot of corporations fell victim in that regard because of unethical practices. You have governing bodies in sport not necessarily saying that, well, of course, FIFA was one of the most, well, there was a lot of scandal in terms of football, all right, but of course it was not exclusive to FIFA, but you had scandals with governing bodies in sport. You had scandals with governments and government officials. And if you think of your own country, you might even think about some scandals which demonstrated that absence of values-based leadership, or leading with integrity, or leading with authenticity, or leading through ethics. And then you had entire industries, sport, education, the pharmaceutical industry, and that's just to name a few, where you had examples of miserable failures in terms of leadership. Notwithstanding, you might have individuals who are extremely charismatic and dynamic and transformational in their dispensation, but of course they fell short in terms of their ability to protect their integrity and to protect their character through sustainable principles. In response, leadership and management theorists began to place a renewed emphasis on the importance of ethics and morality in exemplary leaders in the face of increasing financial greed, corruption, corporate meltdowns, and spiraling unethical practices. As a result, there was a need for values-based leadership. And values-based behaviors are styles that have a moral, authentic, and ethical dimension in addition to the strengths of the charismatic leader that we talked about and the transformational leader that we talked about, and in some cases the laissez-faire type approach through an understanding of the situational theory of leadership, as well as the leadership grid against the backdrop of a concern for what has to be achieved and a concern for those persons involved. So there are strengths in the traditional approaches to leadership, and these strengths were now complemented by the moral, authentic, and ethical dimension, which makes these leaders more admired, and their source of power is now referent power as opposed to legitimate authority or coercive power or reward power, etc. Now, this question, I'm doing this video because this question was asked in the context of the field of criminal justice and public safety. But as I indicated, you see that kind of failure in leadership in terms of business, in terms of politics, in terms of world affairs, in terms of sport, in terms of education. It's all over. But this question was asked. I'm doing this video in response to a question that was asked related to criminal justice and public safety. So I'm asking this question: is this relevant in the field of criminal justice and public safety? And the answer to that is yes, because you see a violation of professional responsibility within the field of criminal justice and public safety. And professional responsibility is all about that psychological contract, that social contract that a professional within the field of criminal justice and public safety, that social contract they possess in terms of the expectation, that reasonable expectation of members of the public or other stakeholders that they would behave in a particular way. And some of the issues and challenges in the field of criminal justice and public safety include excessive use of force in policing. We have seen that. Abuse of power by police officers. We have seen that. Trafficking within the field of corrections, taking contraband items into prison establishments, things that are prohibited articles, allowing prohibited articles and substances into the prison, ethics of noble cause or noble cause corruption. We've seen where we're gonna get this person off the streets because we have to protect the public from this individual, even if it means that we're gonna break the law in the process. We're gonna get evidence from this person, even if it means that we're gonna use some less than ethical means to get this evidence, because it's ethics of noble cause. We've seen that. We've seen corruption. We've heard of corruption in different forms. I'm not going to give any examples because I don't want to cast aspersion on anyone, but we know of corruption in various forms. And then, of course, national security personnel involved in law breaking. We know that happens. That's quite prevalent. Now, what kind of leader or what kind of leadership, what approach to leadership would be useful in addressing some of these challenges within the field of criminal justice, within the field of politics or governments, or within the field of sport, or within the field of education, in any sphere of activity? What kind of leadership is important, is critical? And we talked about sources of power earlier, and one of the key sources of power for the values-based leader is referent power, which we talk about stems from the personal characteristics of the person, such as the degree to which we like, respect, and want to be like them, a form of reverence gained by the leader. That's important for the values-based leader. We're not taking away from the fact that legitimate power may be necessary. In some cases, if we think of values-based leaders through history, we would see that in a lot of instances they had no legitimate power, they had no reward power, they had no coercive power, they were experts in their own rights, but more than anything else, they were liked, they were respected, they were admired. And in order for a leader to be effective long term, you cannot be dependent on direct control. It is more so a question of, I don't want to disappoint this individual. I want to connect with what this individual is doing. I want to be of support. I want to be of service. It's an emotional appeal rather than simply compliance. So referent power is exceptionally important for the values-based leader. And there are certain elements that would attract you to that individual. There are certain elements that would make you like that individual. There are certain elements that would make you admire this individual. There are certain elements that would cause you to hold that individual in high esteem. And some of these elements include significance of morals and ethics to the leader. So this individual holds morals, that differentiation between right or wrong, and ethics, that willingness to treat persons the way you would like to be treated, that willingness to treat persons with fairness, that willingness to comply with what is expected by virtue of the psychological contract or even an explicit agreement. So the significance of morals and ethics of the leader is something that allows you to admire this individual. Authenticity, to be true to yourself. It's not like, who am I when someone is looking, or it's not like I have short-lived values that I'm espousing, but I'm a different person under different circumstances. It's that integrity, that wholeness of character that you are respected, you are admired for. Authenticity. You are also admired because of your effort for congruence between your own values, the values of the organization or the group that you are privileged to serve, with a transformational slant of infusing such values throughout the whole. What does that mean? My values match with my organization's values, and that it doesn't end there. My goal is to infuse such values within every member of the organization. Let me give you an example, because it was asked by a person from public safety and criminal justice. If you are the commissioner of prisons, just take for example, you're the commissioner of prisons, and the values of the organization talks about to create a better prospect of inmates within the system, or to rehabilitate individuals. So one of your values as the commissioner would match with the organization values. I'm here to take care of the whole and to treat, to cause these persons to come out better for having spent time within the system. But it's not just a good match between your values and the values of the organization. You're not, it doesn't end there. You have this transformational slant such that I'm the commissioner of prisons, and this is what we're about, caring about our persons within our care or within our charge. And I'm going to communicate those values to top management, my deputy commissioner and my assistant commissioners. I'm going to communicate those values. That's my role. I have to bring those individuals to the level that I am in terms of my headspace, in terms of my mindset, that we are here to care and look after the persons within our charge. And then, of course, the top management, they're going to get that down to middle management. Those values are permeated to middle management with the full support and endorsement of the commissioner. And then they go further down the chart to the lower rank officers or the second division officers. So the role there is for the congruence between your personal values and the values of the organization, and for you to ensure through transformational leadership, through charismatic leadership, through your dynamism, through the fact that you know what the mission is, you know what the vision is, you know how we're going to go about it, you know our values as we go about these things. How could we communicate that to each and every person within the organization? And because of your efforts in that regard, you are admired and respected, and you would like, people would like to emulate you. You're seen as that kind of role model. Recognition that the needs and values of all stakeholders are relevant. You are admired because you recognize that all stakeholders are important. You try to be fair. You try to treat each person as if they matter, and not that you have a group of first class citizens and then a group of second class citizens within the organization or the group. Everyone matters as best as you can in an equitable way. And of course, you're admired for your focus on being just and fair. So a focus on justice and restorative justice over retributive justice. And what does that mean? How could I restore this situation to the best possible state, rather than how could I ensure that persons are punished for what they do? So you have that concern for restoring a situation and restoring relationships over punishing individuals. And of course, you have that concern for distributive justice, and distributive justice talks about a fair and equitable distribution of all the benefits, all the privilege that can come in the towards the group or towards the organization. Everybody is entitled to a fair share of all the benefits, as well as the hardships. Everybody is entitled to bear some of the brunt of the hardships. Not one group is going to get all the difficult situations, and another group is going to be spared of those difficult situations. And of course, procedural justice. There are procedures in place that are impartial and that are fair to ensure the benefits, the difficulties that we just talked about from the distributive justice perspective. There's fairness in the procedures as well. And these are some of the reasons why the values-based leader would be respected, would be admired, would be held in high esteem for their significant concern in relation to morals and ethics, for their authenticity, for their congruence of their values and the organization's values, as well as their efforts to ensure it's everyone's values, a recognition that each class of stakeholders matter, and a recognition of a focus on justice, where you're attempting to correct a situation rather than punish individuals. You're concerned about distributive as well as procedural justice. Now, can you think of any value-based leaders through history? That's just a quick stop and think. Can you think of any value-based leaders through history? I can think of several of them. I'll give you the opportunity to go through your thoughts based on what we've discussed, and see who or what you come up with. Now, other elements of values-based leadership, we talked about these. These are elements of the transformational leader, or aspects of transformational leadership: inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, idealized influence, and individualized consideration. We just talk about them in a little more detail. Inspirational motivation. Like the charismatic leader, promoting a consistent vision, mission, and set of values. I want to inspire persons. I want to appeal to persons to see our vision, buy into our mission, have those values that we hold there. I'm inspiring persons in that regard, speaking to the heart of followers and knowing what they want from every interaction. Leaders speak to the heart of their followers, and they know what they want from every interaction with each person or each group with which they're interacting. Guiding followers by providing a sense of meaning and challenge in relation to the vision and the mission and the values. We talk about that emotional appeal rather than simply just instructions and compliance, providing that sense of meaning and challenge. How could we make things better for all our stakeholders, for our end users, for the planet? Working enthusiastically and optimistically to foster the spirit of teamwork and commitment. We're all in this together. Together everyone achieves the mission. Together everyone achieves more. How can we do it with that kind of not breaking that continuum of respect and consideration for each other as we go about our task collectively? That's inspirational motivation. And then we have characteristic again of a value-based leader: intellectual stimulation. And when we talk about intellectual stimulation, leaders encourage their followers to be innovative and creative. Let's find a new way to do things. Let's have an innovative orientation rather than a custodial orientation. A custodial orientation says, if it ain't break, don't fix it. An innovative orientation says, how could we do this better? How could we provide more? How could we do this easier? How could we serve more? How could we love more? How could we share more? How could we grow more? That's an innovative orientation. Intellectual stimulation allows the values-based leader to encourage new ideas. Let's just go for one more. We're going to brainstorm and we're going to get 20 ideas. Let's just go for one more. So it encourages new ideas. It encourages you to challenge yourself intellectually, to be intellectually curious, to connect to the information that will allow you to be of service in an innovative and creative way. Leaders focus on the what in problems and not necessarily on who's responsible. What's going on in this situation and how could we improve? They focus on problem solving and not simply problem spotting, not just seeing the problems, but how can we solve the problems? They have no hesitation in discarding an old practice when they are no longer useful. So the antiquity of the malpractice is no reason for it to be perpetuated. It's no longer useful. Not because we've been doing it so long, we're going to continue. And that's the intellectual stimulation that is brought to bear on the inspirational motivation that a values-based leader would provide. Then we talk about idealized influence. And we say the leader can only influence only when he practices what he preaches. So I am going to behave in a particular way, and I'm going to ask persons to behave in that way. I want to infuse other persons with my values. The only way for me to do that is for me to be that. So my audio, what I'm saying, and my video, what you're seeing, they are one. There's integrity between what I'm saying and my actions. Acts as role models that followers seek to emulate. So I'm the ideal influence. You can emulate me. You would want to emulate me because I carry myself in a particular way in relation to our mission, vision, objectives, those we are privileged to serve, those we are privileged to provide for. Wins the trust and respect through their actions. And 360-degree leadership is important in this regard. And what is 360-degree leadership? 360-degree leadership talks about idealized influence in relation to various classes of stakeholders. How do I behave such that I gain the respect and trust of my clients or customers? How do I behave such that I gain the admiration, the respect, the trust of my suppliers? How do I behave such that I gain the respect of my subordinates, of my peers, of my leaders? That's 360-degree leadership. How do I win trust of these various classes of stakeholders? Through idealized influence. Values-based leaders place their followers' needs over their own. It's called sacrificial leadership. Sacrifice their personal gains for them and demonstrate high standards of ethical conduct. Idealizing influence. I see this. These are the ideal ways that I should be behaving, and you are respected and admired for that. The use of power is aimed at influencing them to strive for the common goals of the organization rather than it's about me and I'm in a position to give power, to give instructions, and I'm in a position to reward, and I'm in a position to coerce. The use of power is aimed at influencing subordinates to strive for the common goals of the organization. Individualized consideration. Leaders act as mentors to their followers and reward them for creativity and innovation. So you're going to be rewarded, consistent with the transactional leadership, you're going to be rewarded for your creativity and innovation as we attempt to treat with specific challenges within the organization. Followers are treated differently according to their talents and knowledge. So everybody has something to contribute. Not everybody would contribute the same thing, but everybody has something to contribute. And for your contribution, you're going to get that individualized consideration. Not everybody would be rewarded in the same way. For example, some persons may be they may be at the first level of Maslow hierarchy of needs, which we would have discussed in previous discussions: food, clothing, and shelter. Some people may be at the level of belongingness. Some people may be at the level of esteem. So they're not going to reward all persons in the same way. What if you give overtime as a reward for persons behaving in a desirable way, and that person wants more time to spend with their family? So individualized considerations allow you to treat persons according to what serves them best. And that's the values-based leader understands that in relation to their subordinates. They are empowered to make decisions and are always provided with the needed support to implement their decisions. So they are in a position to make certain kinds of decisions, and they are in a position to back their decisions as well. So as we end this video here, we wanted to talk about values-based leadership. And we wanted to talk about values-based leadership from the perspective of, we have the traditional approaches to leadership, which have served humanity quite well through history. But within the 21st century, we're seeing increased levels of the absence of professional responsibility within various organizations, within various industries. And we're now asking the question, is values-based leadership that missing link that we must now focus on, that would allow leaders to be truly successful and effective, and to lead their organizations through sustainable principles such that they are here for the long term, serving those persons they are privileged to serve. So that brings us to the end of this discussion that I wanted to have. I hope you guys get a better understanding of values-based leadership, such that you are able to develop that value consensus, which means that this is now going to be part of your value system. I'm going to be an ethical, authentic, and moral leader who's going to guide those that I'm privileged to guide, those that I'm privileged to serve, in ways that would sustain the group or the organization well into the future and make the greatest possible positive impact on humanity. So that brings us to the end of this video, guys. Hope you were inspired. All the best.